The sea breeze blew backward across the bay, lashing the empty harbor like someone was taking a long, deep, icy breath right before saying something no one dared to hear. The yacht Arcturus had just docked. Everything seemed normal, soft yellow lights, the scent of fresh paint, the steady click of leather shoes on the deck. But the moment the bow touched the harbor water, the canine dog Blitz, who had been standing motionless next to Officer Miles Carter, let out a sudden growl without any command. It was not a threatening bark, nor was it the growl of excitement. It was low, hoarse, and drawn out, like the dog's throat was warning of something that had never been named. Miles looked down. Blitz's gaze was fixed on the side of the yacht, not on a person, but on an empty spot near the water's edge where no one paid attention. A dry leaf floated over, touched that exact spot, then drifted back out like even the water refused to come in contact with it. Miles said nothing. He simply placed his hand on Blitz's neck. The dog's skin twitched. Its heart rate was rising. There was no specific threat, but the intuition inside him, the one that had kept him alive through 3 ambushes in Fallujah, was setting off alarms. 11 o'clock. The watch on his wrist ticked over just as Miles stepped onto the dock. The salty air was laced with the smell of oil from the harbor. The lights on the yacht Arcturus still sparkled like a luxurious illusion. But he had never trusted lights, especially the ones that looked a little too perfect. On the deck, a few men in suits walked past each other without exchanging a word, just glances. Quick, tight, locked down like a safe. One of them, tall, silver-haired, wearing leather gloves, that was Ivano Drakic, a name once listed on Interpol's Red Notice, a trafficker who moved contraband through North Africa without leaving a trace. And now he had returned cloaked in humanitarian efforts, funding post-war healthcare and education. The media called him a symbol of rebirth, rising from the ashes of war. But to Miles, he was just a fox in a new coat. Blitz still would not take his eyes off the ship. No growl, no whimper. But his body was taut like a drawn bowstring. Miles knew right away the dog was staying silent like a sniper waiting for the order to fire. "Let's go," he whispered. Blitz did not move. He turned to look at Miles, those jet-black eyes deep, not panicked, just as if he were asking, "Are you sure?" Miles stepped aboard the yacht in his role as security oversight, assigned by the local police department, a privilege normally reserved for officers with spotless records and easy-to-manage profiles. He was not one of them, but he had something they needed: the instincts of a man who had survived an improvised explosive device in Fallujah, and a canine who had detected explosives 3 times where machines had failed. The hallway leading to the guest lounge was paneled with African ebony wood, coated with matte varnish, and lit by warm yellow lights like a 5-star banquet hall. The sound of leather shoes echoed in scattered rhythm. Glasses of red wine, dark as blood, shimmered on glass tables. Everything was too clean, too still, too perfect, like an event designed for one thing, only to ensure absolutely nothing unusual happened. Miles scanned the space. Not a single stain, no scratches, not even the soft hum of air conditioning. The ship was not just maintained, it was staged. Blitz walked slowly behind him, then suddenly stopped in front of a closed door at the end of the hallway, marked with a plain brass sign, "Food Storage. No entry." Blitz took another step forward, lowered his nose to the deck, and let out a faint hiss. Not a growl, not a bark, just a drawn-out hiss, like a snake slithering under skin. Miles placed his hand on the dog's neck. The skin twitched, heart racing. A security guard in a naval uniform stepped in front of him. "I am sorry, this area is for ship operations personnel only." Miles pulled out his ID. "I am a supervising officer. This is a service dog authorized to inspect any area showing signs of unusual activity." The guard hesitated, eyes flicking toward the hallway camera, then said in a low voice, Mr. Drakic has requested not to be disturbed during the aid shipment transfer. If you need anything, just file a report, someone will get back to you." Miles did not respond. He reached down and gently tapped Blitz's neck. Their eyes met for just a second, but it was enough for his partner to understand, stand down. Not out of fear, but because the enemy here was not on any criminal blacklist. He was on the list of political donors. Back in the observation room, Miles noticed that someone had just left the security control chair. The monitors showing the ship's cameras were in playback mode, clear signs of unauthorized access. He checked the access logs, but the data had been wiped clean without a trace. A few minutes later, the harbor commander appeared, a middle-aged man with a warm, courteous voice. He carried himself more like a diplomat than a military officer. "Mr. Carter, I was informed that you have been asking quite a few questions about our guest tonight." Miles did not react. The man continued, his voice still calm and steady. "You know, around here sometimes knowing less keeps you alive longer. This ship, its guests, and the cargo below deck, they've all been cleared at the highest level. We would really hate to strain any diplomatic relationships, you understand." Miles stayed silent. Blitz lay at his feet, but his ears twitched in instinctive response to an unfamiliar sound from down the hallway. A moment later, the door opened. A logistics staff member entered and whispered something into the commander's ear. The man's face shifted slightly, but quickly he smiled again, just as courteous and composed. "Perhaps tonight should end here. Mr. Drakic does not appreciate being observed when he has not yet chosen to present his humanitarian project. If you have concerns, I suggest submitting them to the Political Affairs Office, rather than running around like a private investigator." Miles nodded, but said nothing. His steps turned slowly toward the staircase leading down to the lower deck as if he were giving up. But only he knew the thing he was looking for was not in any official report. It was in the eyes of those trying to hide something that could not be hidden. The next morning, Miles returned to the local harbor police office and requested the crew manifest of the Arcturus. The clerk hesitated for a moment, then printed out a copy, whispering, almost like a warning. "I printed this from the system yesterday today when I opened it again. One name was gone." Miles scanned the list 17 crew members, but on the previously printed record, there were 18. The missing name was Kaleo Ramirez, a 28-year-old Colombian-born engine technician with no criminal record or history. His file was clean, too clean, and sometimes that is a red flag in itself. When Miles asked about the physical personnel file, the clerk sighed. That folder is missing too. He walked back to his car and sat in silence in the driver's seat, his hand clenched into a fist. His instincts, the ones that had saved his life more than once, were screaming now someone had died, and someone else did not want him to find the body. Blitz sat quietly in the passenger seat. He did not bark, but his back twitched repeatedly, an involuntary reaction that only happened when the nervous system was overstimulated, or when a completely unfamiliar scent was approaching. Miles decided to take Blitz back to the harbor, not to board the yacht, but just to walk around the area where the Arcturus had been docked the night before. As they got close to the container lot, Blitz suddenly yanked the leash and lunged toward a silver-gray shipping container, unlocked, unsealed, and unmarked. Miles opened the door. Inside it was empty, except for one thing. A work jacket stained with oil and dark brown blood, balled up like it had been stuffed in a hurry. Blitz let out a low hiss, but did not go inside like he usually would. Instead, he sat at the door, his head-lowered mouth slightly open, teeth exposed on one side. It was not aggression. It was fear. Miles stepped forward and picked up the jacket. Just then, a soft sound came from beneath the container, like the roll of a shell casing. But when he crouched down to look, there was nothing. Just darkness. stillness, a chill that crept over the skin. That same night, Miles received a call from a superior, not his direct commanding officer, but Colonel Rosenthal, head of Special Liaison for the Federal Rapid Response Force. Carter, the man's voice was dry and sharp like whetstone. "I hear you have been more active than your assignment requires. I am just doing my duty." Miles replied, not defiant, but clearly not submissive either. Rosenthal paused, then said, "You were once decorated in Syria. You know what a battlefield looks like. But this is a political front. Around here, death never gets called by its real name, and the dogs should stay in their cages unless called." The line went dead. Miles hung up and turned to look at Blitz. The dog was still trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but from some kind of invisible signal that Miles had never seen affect him before. It was not ordinary fear. It felt more like interference with instinct itself. A few hours later, an official report about the protective jacket was returned to him with just one line: "No trace of human blood found. Sample invalid." But what sent a cold shiver down Miles's spine was not the statement, it was the signature at the bottom. Instead of the local forensic examiner, the report was stamped by a military agency from a foreign strategic division, one that had nothing to do with any port civilian matter or domestic jurisdiction. Later that same night, the harbor surveillance system glitched for exactly 27 minutes. In that window, one container left the port without a manifest, without a transport vehicle, without any camera recording it. The next morning, Blitz woke up slower than usual. He did not rush to the door like he always did. He just lay there, head resting against the wall, eyes open but unfocused, as if some part of him had been pulled out. Miles ran his hand down the dog's back. No wounds, no fever, no visible injury. But Blitz's reaction told him everything. Something had touched the dog's mind. That afternoon, after 3 hours of silent observation from a distance, Miles made a decision. No procedures, no reports, no requests for permission. The Arcturus had left the main harbor and was anchored in a secluded bay for a so-called special maintenance procedure before its next voyage into international waters. A team of outside technicians had been brought aboard, but their identities were never submitted to the Harbor Control Office. Miles did not need confirmation. He already knew what was being hidden beneath the deck, where no cameras could reach, where refrigeration units ran non-stop without ever receiving a single shipment of food. His security badge no longer worked. It had been deactivated after the call with Colonel Rosenthal. But Blitz did not need a badge. All he needed was to be released at the right time. Miles chose sunset. The light was fading. Crew shifts were changing. He led Blitz along the side route near the west dock used by supply boats, mostly empty, with no constant patrols. "Go around to the port side," Miles whispered, gently rubbing Blitz's neck. "Find what made you growl like that." The dog looked up at him, no longer confused, like he had been for days. Instead, there was a sharp, clear focus in his eyes, like he remembered whatever had frightened him, but this time he was not going to run. Blitz jumped down from the concrete ledge without making a sound. With the grace of a seasoned warrior, he weaved through the still rows of containers, heading toward the stern of the yacht. Miles watched through infrared binoculars from a high vantage point 150 meters away, holding his breath as Blitz stopped at a location that had previously been marked as not of interest. Suddenly, Blitz let out a hiss, a long, low sound held in the throat like he was trying not to reveal his position, but could not help reacting. He started digging claws, scraping against an old metal platform next to the floating dock. Each scrape kicked up faint white dust, the kind only ship engineers would recognize, magnesium powder used to dry protective coatings on military-grade aluminum alloys. Then, without warning, Blitz stopped his nose pressed against a small, unmarked container. Just a rough metal box painted gray, no logo, no serial number. Blitz sniffed carefully, then growled. But this time, he did not back away like usual. Instead, he bared his teeth and bit down hard. A sharp metallic clang rang out, teeth against steel, then a soft rip like an outer layer being torn. Miles jolted behind the binoculars. Blitz was backing away. A shard of metal had broken off from the bite, and inside it was not frozen food. It was not consumer electronics as the shipping manifest claimed. It was a block of alloy embedded with microcircuits housed in an insulated core, a structure that could only be one thing: a long-range military signal transmitter. Miles did not wait another second. He activated a secure line and contacted an old friend in the tactical response team, sending the coordinates where Blitz was standing along with a short, internal code, high EM density military signal core found. 2 minutes later, a ping came through his earpiece. Received. Hold position. You may be in a signal-blocked zone. Miles immediately pulled back toward the maintenance stairs, hoping to approach directly. But just as he stepped out of cover, he was blocked by 2 security personnel, both without name tags. "Who are you? This area is restricted. I am an investigating officer. Under ORD, you are no longer on the current access list. We were ordered to detain you for safety during the operation." Miles understood instantly. Everything had been orchestrated, even before he made a move. Those eyes that had followed him from the beginning, from Rosenthal, from the port commander, even from higher up, they were never coincidence. And while Miles faced a wall of bodies, Blitz on the other end of the yacht was dealing with a different kind of enemy, one that could not be seen. At that moment, inside the metal casing that had been bitten open, the exposed circuits began to pulse. Blitz whimpered, a sharp tremor in his ears, his body staggering like he had been hit by an electric wave. The dog stumbled back, collapsing beside the metal block. After a moment, Blitz forced himself up, but no longer steady. He moved as if the deck itself was tilted, or as if his sense of orientation had been thrown off. Miles felt it in his bones. Something was very wrong. He yelled into the radio, "Send the drone to Blitz's location now." I repeat, tracking drone to that point immediately. A small drone launched silently from a surveillance post 1.5 miles away. On the monitor, the image wavered slightly, then stabilized as the infrared camera locked onto its target, Blitz, lying next to the alloy container, breathing hard, a faint froth forming at his nose. The drone's thermal sensors triggered an alert. The core temperature of the metal object was above 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 60 degrees Celsius, even though it sat in full shade. Miles clenched his jaw. A device radiating that kind of heat through such a thick casing, it could not be consumer grade. This was tactical-grade equipment, and that confirmed one thing the ship was carrying: not just contraband, but classified military weapon components. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The drone signal cut out. Miles spun around. Behind him, the 2 security men had drawn taser batons. One of them spoke quietly, but clearly, "We do not want to use force, Officer Carter, but if you keep pushing, what happened to your dog will be the light version." At that moment, a violent bark rang out from the lower deck. The sound cracked through the air like a gunshot. Then, silence. Miles slammed the binoculars to the ground, turned, and struck one of the men cleanly. But the other was faster. The taser baton hit his shoulder, sending a jolt through his entire body. He collapsed, but before darkness closed in, he saw one last thing. Blitz was trying to stand, though his back legs trembled as if the nerves had lost control. But his eyes never left the metal object. He was guarding it with his body, even knowing it might be what would kill him. When Miles regained consciousness, he was in a temporary medical room. No signage, no windows, just the soft hum of the air system. On his wrist, a tracking device glowed red. He was being monitored. But he did not care. When the door opened, he asked just one thing: "Where is Blitz?" No one answered. Only a thin file folder was placed on the table. Stamped top secret. No copies allowed. Beneath the heading, bold black letters, "Recommendation for suspension of canine unit." Subject displayed abnormal response to encrypted military wave transmission. At the bottom, a signature, one he recognized immediately, chilling to the bone: Rosenthal. Miles gripped the paper tightly and understood. The first mask had fallen. Blitz was taken to the military veterinary station that very night, his entire body lethargic, motor reflexes nearly shut down. There were no visible wounds, no blood loss. But his body temperature had dropped suddenly, and his motor nervous system was showing signs of regional failure, especially in the cerebellum, the part of the brain that controls balance and spatial orientation in dogs. Miles was present as the doctors inserted an IV into Blitz's leg, but none of them could explain what had happened. The medical readings were cold clinical and completely failed to answer one simple question: why had one of the most elite canine units collapsed without a single shot being fired? "You should leave him here for a few days for further monitoring," a veterinarian said, her eyes avoiding his as she stared at Blitz's brainwave chart, a pattern unlike anything she had seen before. Miles nodded, but his mind was restless. He sat beside Blitz, the dog lying still, eyes open but unmoving, as if wrapped in some invisible fog. "What did they do to you, Blitz?" There was no bark in reply, no familiar look of focus or determination. Only a deep fatigue, as if Blitz had fallen into the farthest depths of exhaustion, not of the body, but something more, like an intrusion from within. At 3:00 in the morning, Miles was still at the medical station. Outside the glass doors, the lawn was blanketed in fog security lights, blinking slowly like a tired breath. He opened his laptop, logged into an isolated server not connected to the main system, and pulled up an old video clip footage from Blitz's collar camera during a weapons bust at the Iran border. In that footage, Blitz charged like an arrow, without hesitation, without a moment's doubt. He barked, growled, tail stiff and straight like a guiding spear, the reflexes of a warrior born to fight. But this time, facing that metal-cased device inside the cold storage, Blitz had hesitated. No barking, no charging, only a low growl, and then trembling. Miles froze the video at the moment Blitz bit into the metal shell. A small spark flared from the collar of the device. Frame-by-frame analysis showed it was not a normal physical reaction. It was a high-frequency pulse discharge, like a microwave signal programmed to reverse transmit when physically tampered with. An electromagnetic trap designed for dogs. Miles felt the skin on his hands go cold. A terrible question crept into his mind. They are not just smuggling weapons, they are testing neurological bioweapons, and Blitz was the first living subject to be affected. The next morning, Miles met with the lead military veterinarian, Dr. Joanna Klein, a woman who had served for years with combat animal medical teams in Kosovo and Yemen. She was not surprised to see him. Instead, her eyes silently shifted to Blitz's EEG monitor wave patterns, spiking erratically, broken by long, flat lines. "Have you ever seen this kind of wave before?" Joanna asked without looking up. Miles stepped closer. "It looks like REM sleep, but extended way too long, and mixed with gamma spikes." Joanna nodded slightly, a response often seen in humans with temporary frontal lobe trauma. But Blitz is not human. His brain has a completely different architecture. If those signals are affecting him, then it can only be. She did not finish her sentence. Instead, she opened a digital diagram, a 3D scan, of Blitz's skull, marked with dense red clusters around his wave reception zones, the ears, the base of the nose, and most disturbingly, the rear of the skull, where the central nervous cord connects to the cerebellum. Miles felt his stomach clench. Someone is trying to manipulate biological response through brainwave interference, he whispered. And Blitz was chosen as the test subject. Joanna was silent for a long moment. Then she handed him an unsealed envelope. This came in this morning. No sender, no metadata, just this Blitz's brain scan image, and a handwritten note. Inside was a small piece of paper. If you let it continue, you will not just lose the dog. You will lose everything you thought was real. Miles clenched the note in his fist. His breath came heavy like he had just climbed a cliff. No one in the security field sends handwritten threats unless they are trying to say something the system would never allow through email. That afternoon, Miles did not return home. He stayed in the auxiliary monitoring room, the only place without a direct camera feed on the occupant, just a partial overhead angle. A blind spot left behind by accident in the building's original design. In front of him sat a cold cup of coffee, an old pistol tucked in a leather case, and the case file on Ivano Drakic. All of it vague. All of it edited. Miles went line by line through the reports. Everything was clean, too clean. Timelines perfectly aligned, shipping manifests, flawless to the point that made a field agent like him feel unsettled. No arms trafficker has a paper trail that's spotless unless the system itself wrote it for them. The phone rang. Only one word showed on the screen: internal. Miles hesitated, then picked up. The voice on the other end did not introduce itself. "Carter, we know what you are looking for, and this is your final warning stop. Blitz is a canine officer. He was injured in the line of duty. No one's disputing that. Then why was his medical file sent directly to Top Secret Command?" A long pause. Then the voice shifted tone just slightly. "Have you ever seen a dog bark at the system?" Miles stood straight up, but the call had already ended. Blitz was not just a canine. He was a mirror reflecting what no one dared to say, and that was why he had been attacked. Miles left the station and drove straight to the old base where he and Blitz had trained together. He was not looking for answers. He was looking for the moment that dog once saved his life, so that now it could be his turn to return the favor. Miles returned to the base after nearly a year away. The place was unchanged, the same rusted wire fences, training grounds marked with scattered paw prints, and rows of steel kennels behind the guard post, the place Blitz once called home back when he was still a rookie. He stood silently in front of kennel number 04, the same spot where Blitz had once rushed toward him during a life-or-death drill. No barking, no hesitation, no looking around, just one direction toward the person he had been trained to protect. That day, Blitz had saved Miles from an improvised landmine. But no one remembered that except Miles. He was not here for nostalgia. He needed something more. He stepped into the archive room where behavioral reports, biometric records, and regular blood samples for service dogs were stored. After a few minutes of searching, he found something strange. All recent data on Blitz, including blood serum indexes, neural enzymes, and updated EEG charts, had been pulled from the system tagged with access code level Black Echo, a classification reserved only for experimental military biotech projects. His heart pounded. Black Echo had nothing to do with canine units, unless Blitz had unintentionally reacted to a form of encrypted biological signal. And that reaction had been logged as a research event. It was clear now Blitz had not been injured during duty. He was hurt because he had become living evidence of an undisclosed technology. Miles stepped out of the archive, still gripping the data copies. The evening breeze rolled in light, but enough to make him shiver. Not from cold, but from the realization that whoever harmed Blitz might not be across the line of the law, but wearing the same uniform as him. That night, Miles sat in his vehicle door, slightly open dim light casting shadows across his heavy face. Blitz lay in the back seat, still unresponsive. Every breath the dog took hit Miles like a punch to the chest. He looked at the faded canine badge hanging from the rearview mirror, the one Blitz had once grabbed and carried across the training yard like a prize. Back then, it stood for honor. Now, it was just proof that they had once believed in a system of justice. That had cracked. Miles reached down and ran his hand along Blitz's camera harness. Beneath the fabric, he found a scratch not made by Blitz, but likely from something sharp outside. He pulled up the final frame before Blitz collapsed. Pause. Zoom in. Under the alloy casing Blitz had bitten, a faint engraving appeared, mostly covered in paint. It was not military, nor a label. It was a double spiral, the same symbol unearthed in African digs, tied to an ancient sect called the Wavekeepers. Miles looked up. Wind howled into the car. He knew the worst was still ahead. The sky was dry and gray, but inside Miles, something colder weighed on his chest. He had been sitting for over 2 hours, staring through frosted glass into Blitz's care unit. The dog no longer moved. He lay still, eyes open, but clouded pupils shrunken. No one said it, but they all knew a part of Blitz was gone. Joanna, the lead vet, stood beside the bedhand on the EEG monitor. The brainwaves on screen flickered irregularly, like they were influenced by an unknown frequency. Something outside medical understanding. Miles gripped the steering wheel, eyes red not from exhaustion, but helplessness. Blitz was the last teammate left, the only one who had once charged through fire to save him. Blitz never distinguished mission from loyalty. Protecting Miles was instinct as natural as breath. At 2:36 a.m., the EEG spiked. Joanna stepped back and signaled everyone to stop. A gamma wave appeared, held for over 30 seconds, then vanished. At the same time, Blitz whimpered, legs twitching like he was running in a dream. Miles ran in. Blitz Joanna held him back. "Wait, something's happening. I've never seen this neural activity." Then a click from the corner, the printer. A page slid out unprompted. On it, a waveform, and beneath it, strange symbols, not letters or numbers. More like ancient glyphs, a map. Miles bent down. In the top left corner, a bold double spiral, just like the symbol beneath the alloy casing Blitz had bitten. A chill crept up his spine. Joanna whispered, "You once said that explosion in Syria involved a similar device." Miles nodded, and the man who died was Elijah Dean, my closest friend. Joanna frowned. "This may sound crazy, but I think someone or something is trying to communicate. Not with us, with him." She pointed at Blitz. She pointed to Blitz. Miles looked at Blitz. His eyes were still clouded, but tears had begun to well. One drop, then two, as if he were remembering something not from this life. 3 in the morning. Inside the quiet veterinary facility, the monitors blinked softly, steady like a heartbeat. But that night in the dim corridor, Miles heard a sound that did not belong, chains brushing faintly against the floor. He stepped out of the room on instinct. The hallway was long and empty, fluorescent lights flickering erratically on and off, as if intentionally tampered with. At the far end, the storage room door stood slightly ajar. Miles moved carefully. His hand brushed against the holster at his waist, an old habit resurfacing even though he knew there was no visible enemy here. When he pushed the door open, everything was silent. No one inside. But in the center of the room sat an old training cage, the kind once used for canine drills. Inside it, a soldier's uniform jacket covered in dust, and a single dog tag. Miles bent down and picked it up, his palm trembling. Elijah Dean, 40719, Opus, USF. His heart stopped for a beat. That tag had been returned to Elijah's family after his death. Miles had been the one to deliver it. He remembered it clearly. So why? Was it here behind the cage part of the brick wall had flaked away, scratched deep as if clawed at? Inside the crack, someone had drawn a familiar image in black chalk, the double spiral. Miles stood frozen. He understood this was no coincidence. Blitz had not simply been affected by electromagnetic waves. He had become a conduit connecting a world with no name to something that had never been allowed to rest. He returned to the recovery room. Joanna was asleep at the desk, Blitz still motionless. But as Miles approached, the dog let out a low whine, weak but unmistakably responsive. Miles sat down beside him and gently placed Elijah's dog tag on Blitz's chest. Immediately, the dog's eyes twitched. Then his whole body tensed for a moment, as if hit by a light current, then relaxed, exhaling softly. Joanna startled awake and rushed over to check the monitor. Brain activity is stabilizing. Gamma waves just dropped close to biological threshold. "What did you do?" Miles did not answer right away. He stared at the dog tag, then replied quietly, "I am not sure. Maybe." Blitz is not alone. A long silence followed. Joanna did not ask anything more, but in her eyes something had shifted, not medical skepticism, but respect. Respect for something that science could not explain. Suddenly, the EEG screen displayed another abnormal waveform, and in that instant, the data printer kicked on again. A new page slid out, not a graph, but a single line of typed words. "It remembers the desert, and it has not forgiven." Miles sat still, hand resting on Blitz's back eyes, fixed on the line, "It remembers the desert, and it has not forgiven." The words were cold but heavy. The whole room seemed to hold its breath, not because of what the message said, but because of what it meant that something or someone was using human technology to say what humanity refused to hear. Joanna stayed silent. Miles looked at her but did not need confirmation. He knew this was no longer about medicine, and not just about him and Blitz. This was something beyond reach, a buried truth. "I think Blitz is carrying Elijah's memories," he whispered. Joanna started to object, then paused, or she replied softly, "Blitz is resonating with what Elijah left behind. Souls can leave bodies, but frequencies remain." Miles nodded. The thought did not frighten him. On the contrary, it brought strange comfort. He looked at Blitz, and for the first time in hours, the dog's eyes moved. A slight glance to the right, as if trying to say something. Miles leaned in, touching his forehead to Blitz's. "I'm listening." No words came, but in his mind, an image flashed too quick to grasp completely: a desert, a signal tower, a stone bunker, and a soldier collapsed in front of a shattered screen. He shivered. "Elijah." Or someone else, Blitz whimpered, then lowered his head. Not from pain, but as if he had just given directions. Joanna whispered, "I think it just showed you a location." Miles nodded. "I need to go back to where it all began. Not here. Syria." A breeze passed through the small window, rustling the stack of medical files. The top page flipped over and fell to the floor. When Joanna picked it up, she froze. Drawn in ink near the edge of the paper, fresh, still sharp, was the double spiral symbol. "Did you let anyone into this room tonight?" Miles shook his head. They looked at each other. No one spoke. But both of them knew from this point on this was no longer in human hands. 7 days later, the sky still hung gray, as if a hand was holding back the sun. Miles drove his old truck into the storage lot near the private docks where the Arcturus had returned after vanishing into international waters. Under flickering floodlights, rows of shipping containers lay motionless like industrial coffins sealed with cold silver paint. Blitz sat in the passenger seat, no longer weak but not fully recovered either. His movements were slow eyes, sharp yet distant, as if he were seeing through invisible layers of space. And what he saw was no longer the human world. Miles gently squeezed the dog's neck. "It's all right. This time, I'm going with you." The day before, he had met with someone Harrison Boone, a former operative from the Tactical Response Unit, disavowed quietly for exposing cross-border weapon routes through neutral territories. Boone no longer trusted the system. But when Miles told him about Blitz and the Elijah dog tag, Boone asked just one question. "Do you want the truth to come out, or do you just want revenge?" Miles answered, "I want the people behind this exposed before they turn a loyal dog into a remote-controlled killer." Boone nodded, and they made a plan. That night they approached the Arcturus from the south through an old supply channel that led to an underground dock beneath an abandoned warehouse. No one paid attention. All the cameras had been diverted to the main berth, where the elite still raised champagne glasses, unaware of the layers of deception beneath them. Blitz led the way, following a familiar scent metal alloy, the same one that had nearly killed him. But this time, there was no growling, no barking, just footsteps steady and deliberate, like a monk walking into a maze. Boone climbed up the auxiliary deck via a rusted anchor line. Miles followed close behind. Under the fractured moonlight, the yacht's surface glimmered, not from paint, but from radar-reflective material, the kind used in high-level military operations. "This is not a civilian vessel," Boone muttered. Miles nodded. "It's a mobile transfer hub, cold storage and signal control combined." They moved deeper into the lower decks, an area that had been off-limits during previous inspections. A digital lock flashed a warning, "Code sentient clearance only." Boone scoffed. "They think sentient is a philosophy. No. It's the name of the project." Miles nodded slightly and pulled a signal cloning device from his pocket, something Joanna had risked everything to get from the internal system after her final shift. The device blinked green, the door unlocked, and the smell hit them instantly. Cold air, iron, ozone, and raw meat. Blitz growled low, then walked forward. Inside the subcompartment beneath the refrigeration bay, there were no voices. Just the faint hiss of overworked cooling systems and tiny mechanical clicks, auto-calibration pulses from internal locks. The hallway was lined with steel pods, sealed with biometric locks. Boone tested 1-0. Miles tried another unresponsive. Then Blitz stopped. He did not growl. He did not bark. He simply sat and stared at the third door. His ears twitched. He had caught a signal. Miles's hand trembled as he pressed the device to the lock. Yellow, then green. The door clicked. Inside was a refrigerated vault stacked with sealed metal crates, each labeled with fake QR codes for frozen food. But Boone, who had dismantled over 20 disguised weapons shipments, saw it instantly. These were neural pulse devices designed to emit focused electromagnetic waves that could interfere with the hippocampus. "Not just for humans," Boone said grimly. The microcontroller size they could fit around a dog's neck, or inside its brain. Miles slumped beside the crate. The veins in his temple throbbed. He thought of Blitz, his clouded eyes, the strange behaviors, the way he scratched at walls like he was trying to broadcast something unseen. "They tested it on canines," Miles muttered. "They turned the most loyal creatures into neural transmitters, used them to scan, navigate, and bridge consciousness." Boone opened a smaller container. Inside were brain scans, each labeled with a canine unit's name. One stood out, Canine Blitz. Gamma wave latency 0.9 seconds. Activation state open signal threshold. Miles snatched the scan. At the bottom, a rushed note in shaky handwriting. Warning: this canine subject reacts to extra simulation data. Uncontrollable. Cease processing. Boone looked at him. It's beyond protocol. It's not just responding, it might be communicating. Miles stood up, not it. The thing connected to it. The thing this project never anticipated. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the yacht's internal speakers, not in any known language, but a whispering tongue that sent a chill through the walls. Blitz growled, not in fear, but in understanding. He moved toward the final door at the end of the hallway. Miles and Boone followed. The door opened as Blitz placed his nose to the panel, like he was the key. Inside was a dark room, lit only by a large screen playing a video no one had ever seen before. Footage appeared a stone bunker in the desert, the same place Miles had visited during a mission years ago in Syria. And at the center of the room stood a mannequin draped in fabric. On its chest was Elijah Dean's dog tag. Miles walked slowly toward the covered figure. Blitz stayed still, no growl, no panic, just bowed his head like a ritual. Boone silently closed the door behind them. The room fell into pitch blackness, except for the faint glow of the screen reflecting off the fabric. With a slow, heavy motion, Miles pulled the covering down. Beneath was a faceless mannequin wired with electrodes across its temple spine and occipital bone. Elijah's dog tag was pinned to its chest, but what froze Miles was not the name. It was the sound now playing from the screen. Not speech, but raw brainwave audio converted into sound. In the static there was something breathing footsteps and barking. Not just any barking, 3 barks spaced apart in the exact sequence Blitz had been trained to use when detecting complex signals. Miles looked at Boone. His face had gone pale. "This is canine brainwave response recording." Miles nodded. Not just a response. This was the first time Blitz was remotely activated 5 years ago. They triggered a neural feedback model using gamma waves synced to simulated memories of Elijah. Boone turned to the wall. A projection now displayed a neural map linking human memory patterns to canine sensory responses. Dead memories revived through the senses of a living dog, Boone murmured. Blitz stepped forward and sniffed the dog tag, then let out a low whine. But what came next froze them both. From the overhead speaker, a human voice broke through, fractured, glitchy, but familiar enough to paralyze the room. "Miles, I can't come back, but it sees me now." Miles dropped to his knees, not in fear, but as if every drop of blood had been pulled from his body. It was Elijah's voice. Real, undeniable, the same voice he had heard over the radio on their final night in Syria. Elijah's brain data possibly recorded before death or extracted without anyone knowing. If that was true, what Miles just heard was not a soul, but a looped signal, a neural echo carried by the only frequency left behind by a fallen comrade. Boone staggered back. What the hell is going on here? Miles looked up at the screen. It was footage of a research team attaching a device to Blitz's head. Joanna was there, but standing in the back like she was only allowed to observe. And leading the operation was a man in a white shirt, silver hair, deep-set eyes Rosenthal. They were never trying to create super soldier dogs, Miles muttered. They wanted to use the memories of the dead to build a biological operating system, and Blitz is the bridge. Boone clenched his jaw. And I think Blitz isn't the only one. I saw at least 6 other names in that list. Miles's fists tightened. He knew this was just the surface. But one thing was certain. Blitz had seen Elijah's soul, and he was living proof of an experiment that pulled humans, animals, and memory into a game with no moral boundaries left. He turned to Boone. "We have to get out. Take all the data, send it to the press, and get Blitz out before the alarm blared." security doors locked tight. Boone drew his weapon. They know we're here. Miles pulled Blitz behind him. The dog didn't flinch. He stepped forward, shielding Miles' eyes blazing. No more fog, no more confusion. It was the look of a warrior, of a soul that had touched the memory of a fallen friend. As the door slammed shut, every ceiling light turned red. The ship's internal system began speaking in 3 languages, not to warn the crew, but to awaken the system itself. Boone gritted his teeth, flipping open a wall panel and yanking out a circuit disruptor. This isn't a basic lock. This yacht's equipped with a military-grade lockdown system, the kind used in nuclear payload transport. Miles looked at the screen. Lines of code were self-erasing. He lunged forward, plugging in the backup drive. The lights blinked. One by one, video files, images, connection charts between canine units and major corporate sponsors downloaded. Among them was a file labeled Hades Gate Vlog. He opened it and nearly stopped breathing. It showed a field test in the desert, 6 canine units being outfitted with devices. And not only did they obey commands, they began transmitting signals based on pre-programmed brainwave frequencies of the dead. Rosenthal's voice on the recording: "You don't need to revive the body. Just preserve the frequency of intent. Each dog is a living frequency, storing, reacting, and relaying. The ideal bioweapon is not a virus, it is instinct." Boone whispered, "They're creating artificial souls, inside dogs." Blitz started to growl low. He stared into a dark corner at the back of the room, where a wall seemed slightly misaligned. Miles knew what that meant. He flicked on a flashlight and aimed. A narrow gap, a possible emergency exit. "Boone, you hold the system. Blitz and I will go through that tunnel with the data." Boone shook his head. "If I hold it, this entire deck will trigger self-destruct." Miles gripped his shoulder. "Trust me. Blitz knows the way. You just need to keep it alive long enough." Boone said nothing. He just nodded once. "Get him out. Don't let him become the last test subject." Miles pushed Blitz into the gap. The dog slipped through, swiftly vanishing into the dark. Miles followed. Behind them, Boone inserted the signal jammer. The red lights dimmed. The screen went silent. And just before the system powered down for good, Boone whispered a final thought, not to anyone in particular: loyalty isn't something machines can control. Miles and Blitz emerged from a hidden hatch near the secondary dock. Saltwater vapor rose around them. The cold outdoor air hit hard. Above, the yacht's alarm continued to wail. A small boat approached. "Joanna, get in." I picked up Blitz's tracker signal. All 3 sped off into the night. In Miles's hand, a hard drive no larger than his palm, but inside the truth that could destroy a chain of labs, private military contractors, and inhumane experiments disguised as global peace initiatives. Joanna looked at Blitz. The dog lay flat at Miles's feet, panting but alert. She gently stroked his back. This dog just saved countless souls who never found peace. Miles said nothing. He stared into the distance where the shape of the yacht was fading into the night fog, as if what had just happened no longer belonged to this world. But he knew the real war was only beginning. Dawn had not yet broken. A thick fog blanketed the coastline like a quiet curtain, hiding the sins that had just been exposed. Inside a small safe house belonging to Joanna, Blitz lay at Miles's feet, breathing evenly, though not yet asleep. The hard drive with data they had risked their lives to recover was plugged into an offline laptop. Joanna examined each file. The system auto-detected over 73 documents flagged as restricted access, most labeled with internal codes belonging to private defense contractors. Miles stood behind her arms, crossed eyes locked on the screen. Each image cut like a blade through the last threads of his faith maps of microcontroller implantation sites in canine units, neurological response logs, post-mortem classification charts of dog breeds most capable of retaining biological intent, and then the worst, a list of military personnel who had volunteered to donate brain data prior to death for the sake of national ideals. Joanna whispered, "This is a global-scale violation of human rights." "No," Miles replied, his voice sharp. "This is soul trafficking." Less than 2 hours later, all communication in their area was cut. External devices went dead. Joanna checked her watch. "We've been located. I don't think it's the US government, but likely a contracted unit." Miles was not surprised. He was used to the fact that when you touch a truth greater than power, the first reaction from above is silence. He exhaled slowly, running a hand down Blitz's back, the dog still awake, lying still as if waiting for a command. "Who can we still trust?" Joanna asked. Miles closed his eyes. In his mind appeared the weathered face of Captain Foster, the former NATO Special Forces commander in Syria. The man Miles once defied for refusing to euthanize a wounded dog simply because it was no longer useful. He opened his eyes. "There's one man, but if I call him, there's no going back." 2 hours later, at an abandoned church on the outskirts of Maine, Captain Foster arrived. His hair was silver, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still sharp as ever. He looked at Blitz, and without a word, knelt down and placed a hand on the dog's head, whispering, "You brought him back. Good job." Joanna stood silent. Miles met Foster's eyes. "We have exactly 36 hours before they legalize this entire project and turn it into an official program." "I know," Foster replied. "They've done it before. But this time, they picked the wrong dog." Foster opened a metal case. Inside was a satellite uplink device isolated from military networks. "We'll send this evidence to an independent global agency and show it to the world all at once." Miles nodded, but just as they began the transmission, a high-pitched electronic screech echoed from the device. Joanna flipped the screen. One line appeared, "Parallel access detected. Third party is monitoring." Blitz sprang up, let out a sharp growl, and bolted outside, dragging Miles with him. Behind the church, a small drone had landed. No pilot, just a steel case. Inside was a handwritten note in Russian. "The more you know, the less free you become." Miles gripped the paper hands, trembling. Not from fear, but from the realization this was no longer a soldier's war. This was a war of systems. A northern wind swept through the churchyard, carrying salt and rust. Blitz stood guard at the doorbody, tense, ready to fight. Miles said nothing. The dog had already read the command in his eyes. Foster slammed the iron door shut, locked it, then turned to Joanna. "We have to split the data, encrypt it into 3 parts. Each of us takes one. They may track us, but they can't erase everything at once." Joanna moved quickly. Lines of code poured down the screen like a waterfall, data, no longer just files or photos, but living proof that could shatter the corporations waging war as a business model. Miles leaned down and stroked Blitz. The dog didn't bark, but stared at the wall at a faint burn mark. The shape resembled a human form. Foster noticed and said quietly, "They executed a messenger in this very room. Burned him alive." Miles closed his eyes. Each breath now felt like an unbreakable oath. At exactly 2:00 a.m., the private satellite link connected. Signals bounced through 7 global nodes: Switzerland, Iceland, Kazakhstan, Singapore. Each station went dark as soon as it received the signal. Joanna shouted, "They're shutting down the relays. Someone's intercepting every route." A secure message appeared on screen. 3 words, "Internal breach confirmed." Foster roared, "Someone among us has been bought." Silence thickened the air. No one looked at each other. Joanna whispered, "It wasn't me." Miles said nothing, he simply held out his hand. Blitz immediately sat at Joanna's feet. A long silence. Then, Foster finally spoke. "Then there's only one way left." The three of them left the church. Each took a separate hard drive. They said nothing about where they were headed because saying it could get them killed. Each person uttered one word, an old battlefield code, Miles' silence. Joanna Mother, Foster November. 3 paths, 3 beliefs, 1 vow. Blitz went with Miles. That was Foster's last command. Dogs are more loyal than men. Miles moved through the forest at night. Blitz led the way, ears alert, sniffing every leaf and branch. But near the hidden satellite relay deep in the mountains, Blitz suddenly froze. Miles raised his hand, halt. Silence. A faint click, barely audible, but to a soldier's ear, unmistakable, a pressure trigger had been activated. He stepped back. Too late. The ground lit up, an electromagnetic mine exploded, throwing both Miles and Blitz backward. Joanna's voice crackled through the radio. Miles' signal lost. Blitz dragged himself upright. One back leg was soaked in blood, but he didn't whimper. He didn't lick his wound. He howled, a primal mix of a growl and a cry, like a call to something not of this world. Miles' chest bruised, struggled to breathe. His ears rang. But then he saw something that silenced the pain. A man in a cloak, face hidden, stepped out from behind the trees. Not a stranger. The figure from his dreams, the one who said, "Blitz has not forgiven." The man stood still, then slowly pointed to his chest where a double spiral symbol was tattooed. The same symbol from the medical lab. Miles understood this was not a warning about wounds. It was about the system itself, and the war was far from over. 3 days after the explosion, Miles opened his eyes in an old wooden cabin with no windows. His wounds had been treated. His body ached. But the worst pain was in his right hand, empty. The hard drive was gone. A handwritten note lay on his chest. "You are lucky to be alive, but if you want Blitz to survive, say nothing more. No one needs you to be a hero." No signature. Miles stood staggering to the door. The cabin was part of a hunting outpost in a frozen pine forest. Outside, a dog barked Blitz, but when Miles reached him, Blitz did not run over like usual. He just looked at him quietly, eyes deep as the night sky. One leg was bandaged. A patch of fur on his neck had been shaved, revealing a small puncture, a sign of either an implant or a signal jammer. Miles embraced him. No words needed. But both man and dog knew the real enemy was no longer in front of them. It was the darkness behind them. When he returned, Miles found himself locked out of the office. Keycard denied. Emails deleted. Service records scrubbed as if he had never existed. Joanna was gone too. Her apartment was ransacked. No one acknowledged ever knowing her. Foster, the most trusted man, was featured on national television, hailed as a hero who stopped a fake military data breach. But Miles saw it in his eyes, that silent plea, "Please don't believe me. I am no longer allowed to speak the truth." The system had taken over, and it did not need to kill him. It only needed to erase him. But Miles did not choose silence. He created an anonymous blog posting stories about Blitz. No data, no hard evidence, just fragments of memory. The night he growled beside the hull of a ship, the bite that tore through electroplated steel, the sound of Blitz howling under a cold moon. At first, no one read it. Then, a retired war correspondent shared it. A former officer left a comment, "I have seen that type of weapon during an operation we were never allowed to mention." The blog began to spread, slowly, like a spark crawling through a dry forest. Blitz started to limp. His old wounds flared up, but every morning he still insisted on going outside, staring out toward the harbor. Miles bought him a new vest, not for combat, but to remind him of who he used to be. One day, while Blitz sat silently beside the old fence, he lifted his head and stared into the distance. His ears perked up. No barking, no growling, just a quiet sigh. Miles crouched down, following the direction of Blitz's gaze, the horizon, where the sun hung low, not quite rising, not quite setting, and he knew Blitz had walked with him to the end of the road. It was time to speak what no one dared say. Miles sent the final manuscript of his book to an independent publisher. The title, The Dog Who Barked at the System. There were no technical documents, no names of corporations, no code names, just the truth seen through the eyes of a dog whose loyalty came at a cost. When the first few thousand copies were printed, people began to ask, why did a dog consistently detect what entire investigation teams missed? Why was a decorated officer erased from records after a single mission? And why had the people connected to Miles begun to vanish through accidents, strange illnesses, or simply silence? No one had answers, but in a canine training class, a young boy raised his hand and asked, if a dog barks at a place where adults say there is nothing, who should I believe? The trainer paused, looked at the boy, and replied, trust the eyes of the dog. The day Blitz passed, there were no sirens, no military funeral, no wreaths, just a simple wooden box carved with Blitz, canine officer, the dog who never looked away. Miles buried it himself in the backyard, near the old oak tree where Blitz used to sit every morning watching the harbor. No barking, no growling, just wind, and the soft creak of an old chain leash still hanging on the fence, a quiet reminder that once there was a dog standing guard for justice. People came quietly after the book spread. An elderly woman brought Miles an old cassette her late husband had worked in the Department of Defense. It held recordings of Blitz's training sessions. No classified material, just barking, and a trainer's voice saying, this dog does not pretend. He only reacts to what he believes is wrong. A boy brought a drawing, a dog barking into the night. Behind him, a man in a hat holding a broken flashlight. Below it read, even if no one else sees it, he will. The boy never said who the dog was, but those eyes, the strength, the clarity, were unmistakably Blitz. Fierce, unafraid, without hate, just the truth, pure as instinct. Miles was invited to speak at a small conference organized by veterans dealing with PTSD and professional loss. He did not wear a uniform, just an old shirt, and a keychain with Blitz's name tag. He did not talk about conspiracies, did not recount the investigation. He said only this. We were taught that we need evidence, protocol, and authority. But sometimes the only guide you have is a feeling no one else believes from a creature that cannot speak. Blitz taught me that. The room went still, then a single clap, then another, and then the whole room stood applauding in silence, as if saying farewell not to a dog but to a fallen soldier who died without anyone knowing. In his final days in the town, Miles would walk alone by the harbor. The ships still docked. The sea still lapped the shore. The path to the old yacht had been repaved, clean, neat, polished. No claw marks, no blood, no trace. But one evening, just as dusk set in, Miles saw something strange. A dog, its breed unclear, stood at the pier. It did not bark, did not move, just stared toward the yacht in the distance, as if waiting for something to return. Miles walked closer. The dog turned to look at him. In its eyes was something haunted yet familiar. Then it vanished into the night. Miles did not follow. He simply turned back, looked out at the ocean, and knew Blitz had never been alone. Now and then, people would send Miles videos. A dog sitting quietly beside a war memorial. A dog barking at the television when the harbor appeared on the news. A dog lying by a military gate, eyes wide open, as if guarding something unnamed. No one had trained them to do that. But maybe they were continuing the watch, because warriors in the dark do not need spotlights. They only need a reason to keep standing guard. The final image in the video fades in Blitz, not in battle, but sitting beside Miles, both of them watching the sunset. Slowly, a line of text appears below. There are heroes who shout, and then there are heroes who bark. Blitz, you barked for the world, even when the world stayed silent. If Blitz's story moved you, please hit the subscribe button to join us on more journeys like this, where justice does not always stand in the light. What are your thoughts after watching this video? Leave a comment below. We read and value every word, because your voice gives stories like this the strength to keep being told. Thank you for taking time to hear not just a story, but a bark that was never truly heard. See you next time in the memories that have yet to rest and the hearts that still refuse to stay silent.